Don Sweeney admitting the Bruins will take a cautious approach at the trade deadline is an admission that this team just does not have it this season.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Monday, February 24th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, we will discuss Saturday's 3-2 overtime loss to the Anaheim Ducks, but the bigger storyline came from Don Sweeney's media availability on Sunday after Bruins practice, and that is where we are going to begin. And the biggest bomb that he dropped is the fact that Hampus Lindholm is unlikely to return for the rest of the season. He had a significant knee injury blocking a Justin Falk shot earlier this season in a game against the St. Louis Blues. He fractured his patella, had surgery. There was no real definitive timeline, and the Bruins were pretty open about that. But because of the complexity of the injury, he's going to have a follow-up procedure next week to remove a little bit of the hardware because it created some irritation as he was going through rehab. Overall, the healing process has gone long, but it's gone well, and he'll have no setbacks moving forward, but it's going to take a little bit more time for him to heal naturally. And they don't want to put a timeline on when he'll be back to 100%. They obviously don't want to rush him in what's becoming kind of a lost season. It's more constructive to allow him to not continue to push the way he had been pushing and let it heal a little more naturally. He had, of course, been skating, looked like he was ramping up to a return to the lineup. And that's a huge loss for the Bruins because in the dozen or so games that he had played in prior to the injury, he was arguably Boston's not only best defenseman, but best player overall. And it's very difficult to evaluate this team fully without their top two defensemen. We'll touch on Charlie McAvoy here in a second, but losing Hampus Lindholm for the season, subtracting one of your best players from the lineup certainly causes you to reevaluate your approach to the remainder of the season and to how you're going to tackle the trade deadline. If you're going to add or look to subtract or retool. As for McAvoy, Sweeney said he's very happy to report that Charlie is doing better out of the hospital. He was at the Four Nations face-off final, doing better at home with Kylie, his wife, Reese, his new son. No timeline in regards to his surgery and his shoulder, but he's doing much better, and they're grateful and appreciative to Bruins team doctor Asnes and the medical staff that took care of him. Now, he was asked about the care for defenseman Charlie McAvoy under Team USA. His medical staff didn't really want to get into it, but he did reiterate a couple times that he is thankful for the Bruins medical staff. So you can kind of read into that what you will. So with Lindholm sidelined for the remainder of the season, McAvoy's status uncertain, his timeline uncertain, and the trade deadline just next Friday. Sweeney said that they are going to take a much more cautious approach to the trade deadline. Historically, they've been pretty aggressive. He's traded a number of first-round picks over the years. They've gone all in, and even then some, dipping into LTIR a couple years ago in that Tyler Bertuzzi trade. They still have picks this year that they don't have because of the trade that was made for Dmitry Orlov and Garnet Hathaway. That second round pick this year is not theirs. But he also said that if there are opportunities to improve the team, now certainly moving forward, that's positional shifts or other teams are trying to identify if they have a strength where they can kind of make a true hockey trade. They will look at all opportunities to improve the team now, but more importantly, moving forward. So they're not going to trade their first round draft pick in order to gain some players, rentals for a playoff push. They're not likely to trade prospects unless they are going to get a young forward or defenseman that could be around for several more years. Similar to the Ryan Donato trade for Charlie Coyle. We've seen them or having, whoever was it, Anders Bjork and the Taylor Hall trade, things like that. Things that could help them this season and beyond. Young players or guys under contract, restricted free agents. Those are some things they may look at. But as of right now, they are not looking to be aggressive in terms of trying to go in for this season. And obviously, that's the right call. We'll see later on. They are still in playoff contention. They're not far out of a playoff spot, but you come out of the Four Nations break, you lose to the Anaheim Ducks, a team, one of few teams that is worse than you in terms of some offensive, defensive, special teams numbers, then it's not looking too good, especially when you only have about 24 games remaining on the schedule. Sweeney said that if things don't happen prior to the deadline, there's some seeds that could be planted for deals at the draft or in the offseason. A lot of conversations with people asking what possible moves the Bruins are willing to make. They're going to take a bit more cautious approach in terms of it being as aggressive as they have in the past. What exactly does that mean for Brad Marchand, some veteran players, some UFAs, RFAs, and even some young guys like Georgi Merkulov and Fabian Lysell? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. Are you looking for a snack that is both nutritious and delicious? Crack into a good source of protein with wonderful pistachios. Wonderful pistachios are the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. I'm a big fan of the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days. Whether I'm at my desk, on the road, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always a go-to. But if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, they have in-shell options as well. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. With Don Sweeney's admission that the Boston Bruins are going to be more cautious at the trade deadline, it means that they will not be buyers per se, they will be sellers. And one of the big assets that they potentially have to move is Captain Brad Marchand. Now, Marchand has made it clear that he doesn't really want to consider going somewhere else. Don Sweeney has always said his ultimate goal is to make Marchand a lifelong Bruin. He said they've been in negotiations with him and his team, communicating with him throughout the year. They'll have a conversation now that the Four Nations is over and sit down with Brad and his representatives and have a clearer path in the next couple weeks as to what his final outcome will be. So there's still a chance that could happen, but I think there's an appetite to keep him around and have him finish his career as a Boston Bruin, which is probably the right call. Although they could, if someone calls and they just absolutely blow the Bruins away with an offer, you have to consider it, especially with the way things are going this season and the Bruins not necessarily getting much younger quickly right now. He said he's pretty clear that they're going to look at all opportunities, whether it's to improve the club now or with an eye towards moving forward. Veteran players have proven they're good players. Is everybody having a career year? No, but they can help the Bruins and can help other teams. You're talking about your Trent Fredericks, your Morgan Geekies, maybe even Charlie Coyle or Brandon Carlo. You receive calls, and you have to make calls at this point in time in the year. That's why he was clear in his intentions to be somewhat cautious, but to explore what might present now as well as moving forward. He's been in discussions and has a pretty clear idea as to where most of the UFAs and RFAs sit. The big UFA, of course, is, well, Brad Marchand and Trent Frederick. Also, Justin Brazeau, and then restricted, you have guys like Morgan Geeky there. They're going to address the Brad one. That'll be the top priority. Unlikely that they'll do anything in terms of contract extensions before the deadline. But all it takes is one phone call for things to change in terms of contract negotiations, as well as trades, of course. You have a lack of picks. Again, I said they don't have a second round pick. They do have their first. Do they want to do some moves that acquire picks and restock? Maybe they try to go the Oliver Wahlstrom route and look at players that are a bit further along, identify some players who were taken in the first round a couple of years ago. That's what they did with Wahlstrom, Max Jones, Riley Tufte. Maybe try to get some value out of players who had high pedigree but aren't as far along in their careers or haven't quite panned out with their respective clubs. All things are on the table at the moment. He did say Fabian Lysell, Georgi Merkulov, if they're playing well, they're going through a good playoff positioning stretch in Providence. Both those players are contributing on a nightly basis. And if their game merits, they're going to get a good opportunity to play back in Boston as well. I think the other thing to mention is the status of interim head coach Joe Sacco. That'll be a conversation for the offseason where they will reevaluate the season as a whole and what Sacco was able to do once taking over from Jim Montgomery. And obviously there's a lot to unpack where they fell short or where they are falling short. Sweeney said in the context of their depth, as a result relates to the injuries, Hampus and McAvoy going down. They didn't get off to the start that they would have liked. And then Joe Sacco took over. They did a very good job in the early going. They had a pretty easy schedule in that time, but they had some things going in the right direction. They took a turn in late January, early February. They started playing more porously, Sweeney said, than they should as a group. They were chasing offense a little bit. Defensively started to give up some things, and you can't do that. And as the games get tighter, you realize the scoring chances are at a minimum. Players are playing at high levels, and they're not just doing the job good enough collectively as a group. And that's reflected in their rankings on offense, defense, special teams, which we'll take a look at here in a moment. They did spring some leaks, he said, and that usually shows up in your depth. And that's probably where the shortcomings sit right now, he said. And you compound that with players not really getting off to great starts, taking some time to get their games going, and it kind of all added up to a poor season. That's just the reality of it. He said they've got some areas that they certainly need to address, and that falls on him. You go back to the offseason, the trade of Linus Ullmark, the big signings, the Swayman contract stalemate that went into training camp, David Pastrnak, Brad Marchand having off-season procedures, not coming in 100%, and then Elias Lindholm getting off to a slower start. He wasn't 100% healthy in training camp. Didn't find the continuity with a couple different line mates, but he has settled in and done a good job overall in being a bit more of a matchup problem, which frees up Pavel Zacha and David Pastrnak to be a little bit more offensively tilted in zone starts. So he is coming along a little bit. He believes he's done a better job lately. Penalty killing, power play hasn't been very effective. That's just not on one person, Sweeney said. It's a 5-man unit, needs to continue to improve. The important thing is that Lindholm has taken ownership, and to his credit, he realizes he hasn't had the overall year that he'd like to. He has had an uptick lately. Someone pointed out to me on social media the other day, he does have like 10 points over his last 14 games or something like that. The production is getting there a bit more. Mutual disappointment at this point from the standpoint of how he would like to perform, what the Bruins thought they were getting when they signed him to that 7-year, $7.75 million per season contract. But he's not going to stop trying, improving, acclimating to the roster, getting better. He's on that, and it's good on him. I've said it several times in the past that it does take some time for players to adjust to new environments, new teammates, new systems, new locker rooms, new cities. All that added up with Lindholm not being 100% healthy in training camp kind of conspired against him. And he's not the only one who has struggled here, let's be honest, but there's a lot in the soup right now in terms of why these Boston Bruins have struggled this season, why they're on the outside looking in, why it's wise to be more cautious at the trade deadline and not try to go make a push for a playoff spot, because even if you get in there, it's going to be tough to beat any of the top teams in the Eastern Conference. It still hurts to have lost Jake DeBrusk. That's a big hole that hasn't been filled. Lindholm, Zadorov, hopefully after full seasons in Boston and a more stable offseason, can come in next season and contribute right off the top. Swayman, too, missing training camp. That can't happen. It really hurt his start to the season. And we see that still with a sub 900 save percentage. The injuries to Lindholm, now McAvoy, certainly not helping. So it's very wise of the Bruins to be looking to sell, to recoup some assets, to look for some prospects or younger players who have yet to pop elsewhere. And we'll see here if Sweeney can work his magic in trades, because that traditionally is where his GM game has been at its strongest. Now, the Bruins did pick up a point that loss to Anaheim on Saturday. We'll take a look at that game real quick, as well as some signals and stats to take away here as the podcast continues. All right, when the game tips off, that is when the action is just getting started on the NBA court, and where you can get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, Never feel like I missed my chance. The app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit fanduel.com to join today. That's fanduel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your day. Available on your favorite podcast app and on subscribe if you have not already. Now, the Bruins came out of the Four Nations face-off break undermanned on the blue line. Lindholm out, McAvoy out, and Mason Lohrei was a question mark coming into it because of illness. He did suit up. His defensive game, not very strong, but he did record a couple assists in this one, setting up Morgan Geekie's game-tying goal late in the third period to force overtime and earn the Bruins a point. They were down 2-0 in this one after the first period. Trevor Zegras scoring, as well as former Bruin Frank Vatrano. But Elias Lindholm helped the Bruins claw back with a power play goal in the second from Pastrnak and Lohrei. Pastrnak keeping his point streak going. And then Morgan Geekie tying it up late in the third period with an extra man out there, which is a very rare occurrence for the Bruins. Unfortunately, it was Leo Carlsson who scored in overtime to give the Ducks the extra point. The Bruins outshot Anaheim 30-29. I discussed the face-off potential there as the Bruins dominated in the face-off circle. Anaheim, one of the worst teams in the dots. Boston went 1 for 4 on the power play. Anaheim went 0 for 1, so that's a positive. Bruins only took 4 minutes in penalties, whereas Anaheim they took 10 minutes in penalties. So overall, not a bad game for the Bruins on the surface, but it was a pretty sloppy game. Expect that after the break. Both teams making some mistakes. They did get the point, and Marchand said, you have to continue to build, be better. Some things they can take away from the game and just get ready for the next one. Very disappointing, though, to just get the 1 point, although to come back and force overtime can be seen as a positive. Swayman was pulled. Geekie scored on a one-timer from the left circle from Lohrei. A review confirmed the goal after an initial ruling of goaltender interference. John Gibson was forced to leave this game with an injury. Lucas Dostal came in, made some pretty big saves to keep them in the lead for quite some time. But the Bruins finally were able to tie it and pick up that 1 point. Pasternak's 14-game point streak is now the third longest by a Bruins player in the last 30 years, trailing Adam Oates, who had 20-game streak in 96-97, and Phil Kessel, who is at 18 games in 2008 and 2009. Now, when it comes to where the Bruins sit in the Eastern Conference playoff race, they are currently on the outside looking in, but only 1 point back of the Ottawa Senators, who have lost 4 in a row, and they're 3 points back of the Detroit Red Wings, who had a collapse against Minnesota on Saturday, but won in overtime on Sunday. In between Boston and those two wildcard teams are the Columbus Blue Jackets, who have 62 points. They're tied with Ottawa. When you look at point percentage, however, so right now, in terms of total points, the Bruins are 10th in the Eastern Conference. In point percentage, I believe they are also 10th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yep. Tied, however, with the New York Rangers and with fewer games remaining on the schedule. And that's where things get a bit tricky for the Bruins, because they have played 58 games, which only New Jersey and Pittsburgh have played more. Boston's .526 point percentage puts them behind Columbus, Ottawa, Detroit, all who are more in the driver's seat when it comes to playoff spots. But having said that, it's still very possible that this Bruins team could make the playoffs, despite having a -26 goal differential, which is fourth worst in the Eastern Conference. Despite scoring, let's see how many goals they are averaging now. They're only averaging 2.74 goals per game, which is 24th in the NHL. They are allowing, 3.17 goals per game, which is 24th in the NHL. Their power play is 30th in the NHL, and their penalty kill is 24th. So if you look at offense per game, goals allowed per game, power play, penalty kill, they are no better than 24th in any of those categories and as low as 30th on the power play. Does that scream playoff team to you? It does not to me. And that's why Don Sweeney is taking this more cautious approach here to the trade deadline, and rightly so. The Bruins have a couple big games on tap this week that will really tell us a bit more about them. If they're able to pull these off, then more power to them. They will be hosting the Maple Leafs tomorrow night, a game that we'll preview on tomorrow's podcast. They will then host the New York Islanders on Thursday, and then they'll have a back-to-back on the road this weekend, playing in Pittsburgh on Saturday and then Minnesota on Sunday. I've mentioned before they have 14 games in March, only 4 of them at home. And there's a long 5-game road trip here at the end of March that will take them to California and Michigan, as well as Vegas. So an uphill battle for these Bruins. Very interested to see what happens over the next couple of weeks with the trade deadline looming. You're going to want to subscribe to Locked On Boston Bruins for all the latest. And you can find YouTube Shorts as well on the Locked On Bruins channel. Locked On Bruins on Instagram. And I've been posting some on my personal TikTok as well, just to see if anybody cares over there. That's it for today's episode, my friends. I hope you all had a great weekend. Taking care of yourselves. Please take care of each other as well. And we'll talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.